Good afternoon. The title of my talk is Surface Appeal of a Nupe Stool. One of the first things that I did when I met my stool was to turn it upside down. I let my eyes scan its surface. I saw how the rings of the wood radiated out from a central peak at the stool's underside. The legs were askew and playfully came alive. Their conical shapes extended out into my space. I thought that this view would be one familiar to the stool's maker, who likely cradled the stool in his lap, upside down, steadying it against his body as he was carving. The texture of the wood was rippled with tool marks, and the form was curiously imperfect. I saw movement, pattern, and history evident on its wooden surface. I turned the stool right side up. I was attracted to the incised design on the stool's top. Around a central circle were arrayed 10 peaks to match the 10 legs below. I saw marks of use and wear and dabs of glue where the wood had cracked under pressure. Here, too, I observed liveliness in the design that kept my eye interested and material evidence that indicated age. During this visit to the storage room of UCL's ethnographic collection, I learned that this stool had no file or recorded history available to analyze. All that I had in terms of information was this hang tag, marking the stool as such, and a database entry dating the stool to the early 20th century, and locating it as being from the Congo, which I can now amend to Nigeria, where it was likely made by the Nupe tribe. I therefore chose observation and visual deliberation as my strongest tools and methods for this project. Oops. Sorry about that. I felt satisfied with what the object's surface had to offer me. During a sequence of encounters with this same object, I built up a familiarity, an attachment to how the stool looked and felt. This scrutiny kept the stool visually accessible in my mind. Vladimir Nabokov has warned that when we concentrate on a material object, whatever its situation, the very act of attention may lead to our involuntarily sinking into the history of that object. He urges us as writers and readers and thinkers to seek out transparent objects through which the past shines. He reminds us to consider the object first before delving into the discourse. I took Nabokov's charge quite literally, and I discovered that the history of the stool was indeed plainly evident, transparent, on its surface. The ridged tool marks covering its legs, the groove abstract design on its top, the horizontal grain of the wood, and the solidity of its one-pieced construction. I found the surface to be a bearer of meaning and a site for representation and communication. I embraced the chance to deal with this object in the present, and as Nabokov encourages, to keep in surface focus with my stool, without preoccupying myself with an exact analysis of its past. During my direct observation, I aimed to make looking into a performative, active process. My imagination veered to other objects and images that I found enhanced my scrutiny of the stool. How did this unfamiliar object fit in with my already present understanding of material culture? My mind was at rest, and my eyes began to function more freely. I drew connections with objects in my own visual Rolodex. These alliances all had to do with construction and decoration, materials, and the process of making. All basic questions that we could and should ask of objects, but which I imagined had never been asked of this stool and these other objects simultaneously. Without reaching for explanation, I enjoyed a visual meandering, some of which I will share with you now. I kept in surface focus. In examining the stool's legs, I was prompted to consider another familiar furniture form, in which multiple legs dominate, the 18th century American high chest, the first elevated piece of case furniture. Here the joiner has designed a series of legs and stretchers that communicate his trepidation with lifting the case off of the ground. What would this colonial joiner think of my Nupe stool? He might marvel at how 10 solid legs were carved from a single block of wood. He might want to polish away the mark of the hand to create more attenuated lines. In both objects, there is a connection between top and bottom. With the stool, the 10-incised peaks on the seat balance with 10 legs that make up its base. With the high chest, the outline of the bottom case mirrors the undulation of the stretcher below. Although vastly different in provenance and time period, both of these objects draw on natural resources and local craftsmanship to fulfill needs and give expression to cultural values and aesthetic desires. In examining the stool's underside and the craftsman's sensitivity to the natural grain of the wood, I was reminded of the work of the woodturner Philip Moulthrop, who uses native woods to the southeast of the United States to create bowls that show off the colors and patterns inherent in the wood itself. With this mosaic bowl, he has glued and epoxied thin discs onto a turned bowl and then turned the whole form again, leaving the cross-sections suspended and giving prominence to their rings. What might Moulthrop's impressions of the stool be? He would certainly appreciate how the African craftsman has utilized the visual impact of the wood and highlighted its grain. I followed the lines of the carving and therefore followed the lines of the movement of the carver's hand. I saw places where the knife may have slipped and extended beyond an intended boundary. I was reminded of Courtney Smith's carving series, in which elaborate schoolwork takes over and even begins to eat away at pieces of furniture. Smith calls attention to the reductive work of the carver. How would she react to the geometric abstract designs on the stool's top? She might applaud the craftsman for containing his carving and for executing it freeform, as she had done. Although both of these pieces are complete works, and as furniture forms they are stationary, these static qualities are challenged by the energy communicated in their carving. As Smith says, the implication of movement exists in the potential continuity of the carving process. Both pieces have blank space open to be filled. Connecting the stool to other objects and fields of knowledge helped me to repeatedly practice acts of attention towards my stool and to see it as new again. I found that my personal research process of mentally creating conversations between my stool and other objects mirrored the liberal aims of the larger 100 Hours project. During our meetings, I was prompted to think of the stool also in conversation with unlikely objects and topics, including a 10-pound note, early modern automatons, and a broken 19th century microscope. I found that this exercise was possible by remaining on the surface and concentrating on construction and decoration, materials, and the process of making. Literally and visually hovering on the surface allowed me to more easily bridge disciplines, object types, time periods, and categories into which we habitually divide objects. I wondered what noise is made when these various objects collide. After all of these conversations across time and place, I yearned to consider my form in the now, as Nabokov urges. What is the present or even future potential for such a stool? Indeed, I discovered that the stool's compelling surface has held its relevancy in the present. While my specific stool would remain in the UCL collections, other similar stools still freely circulate in the internet marketplace as commodities and design statements. The Nupe stool curiously appears on Pinterest, where it stands as a token of visual savvy or an example of design inspiration for the home. Here on my computer screen, I studied how other individuals had incorporated such a stool into their mental, made digital constellations of objects. Here was a presentation of how the Nupe stool fit into their contemporary visual and material take on the world, just as I have shared with you how the stool fit into mine. Popular websites such as Pinterest are built around this concept of surface appeal, an immediate visual attraction that one has to objects and the satisfaction of grouping them with others. In this case, the Nupe stool's history and African design vocabulary plainly evident on its surface lent it attraction. One user succinctly categorized this phenomenon under the heading, Old Africa, New I. So what did this new I discern as a new use or new role for this old African object? One board dedicated entirely to Nupe stools suggested that the stools could make perfect side tables for the living room or bedroom. The description here suggests a recategorization and an assignation of new use. In its original and intended context, the stool would have been used by the female for basic activities such as cooking and spinning. But low to the ground, compared to our standard chair height, the stool is no longer used for seating, but rather as a low side table. I found this new use validated on interior design websites. Ironically, though, its use as a table obscured the design of the stool's surface, those abstract carvings that likely enticed this new eye to old Africa to begin with. Here a stack of Architectural Digest magazines, a periodical that prides itself on design news that is on the now, puts up an opaque barrier against the marks of the past. The viewer is denied the opportunity to appreciate the object's decoration and therefore its history. While the site advertises abstract carvings on the top add interest and depth, these details are invisible to us. Here, two unlikely object types have literally collided, this stack of magazines and my stool form, exhibiting the tensions between surface and depth and present and past that become so central when we concentrate on material objects. Thanks.